Today I'm reviewing The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice. It's an older book. It's the second book of the Vampire Chronicles series by Anne Rice. I reviewed the first book, Interview with a Vampire. Link will appear somewhere for you, and I recommend you watch it because some criticisms I have for The Vampire Lestat I better understood if you know the problems of Interview with a Vampire, and vice versa. Some problems. Is that the way I said it already? But the problems of the one are sometimes best understood if you see the problems in the other. So, yeah. Plot summary. There's a young Lestat de Liancourt, and it's the same Lestat that we meet in Interview with a Vampire. The events of The Vampire Lestat happen after the events of long before the events of Interview with a Vampire, but then in the end they overlap, and then the Vampire Lestat reaches over the time boundary of the Interview with a Vampire. So Interview is basically an episode of the longer Vampire Lestat story. Yeah, and plot summary. I wanted to give a plot summary. The plot is, we meet Lestat, and he has a family and he has his problems, and then he is turned into a vampire, and then he does stuff. And that's, you'll understand this better over the course of this review. Another problem is that, Lestat, Louis 2.0, also she attempts to write him as a contemplative, reflective character who is a deep thinker, and again, she still doesn't know what it looks like to be contemplative in practice. She has an idea of the theory, but showing it, it's not her forte. And we have moments where Lestat defines himself and says, okay, I am the predator, I am death in this savage garden of the world, and me killing people has its own aesthetic. There is something there, and but he doesn't draw any consequences from this. He doesn't change his behavior. He doesn't change his outlook. It's just, maybe it's like this, and then he just continues on. Like he didn't have an important realization, like he didn't just create an identity for himself as a vampire that he didn't have before. There's no impact in this realization. Another aspect is what I call vampire mode, and it's something in Interview with a Vampire. I think it doesn't happen, but in The Vampire Lestat it happens that while Lestat is drinking blood, while he is killing, he finds it okay. All his moral objections, they just vanish. He's super okay with what's happening. He's loving it, the sensation. It's all better than sex and all that. But he never reflects on that. It's never like there's something alien inside him, something that changes him, that makes him less himself or more himself. He never thinks about it, and it's so frustrating because this would have been such an important aspect for Louis, because he doesn't want to kill, but when he's killing, he loves it. There's this vampire mode. So if he were there thinking, if only I could be in vampire mode always, then I wouldn't suffer like this. Or that's what he thinks while he's in vampire mode. Or then when he's out of vampire mode, he's like, oh God, I never want to be like this again. And there's a dual nature and conflict and all that. And it's never explored. It never becomes real. There's this one scene where Lestat goes on stage of the It's not yet called the Théâtre de Vampire. I don't know what it's called at that moment, but he goes on stage and he acts out, he dances, he sings, he makes noise, and it becomes increasingly obvious that he's not a human, that what he does is something that a human shouldn't be able to do. And eventually people flee from the theater, and it's explained that he wants to experience his distance and state his distance from humans, and there is a conflict of identity, of where do I belong, what's my place in all this here, but it's like a seizure, and it happens, and then things just move along again, and it's never talked about again, it's never thought about again, it's just not relevant anymore, and I find that very frustrating. And another point where it's very obvious that Lestat's psychology and his personality is just very flimsy and random. It's just, well, let's do this and then this and blah, and not substantial, is when he first sees Akasha. She's the mother of all vampires, and she's super old and ancient, and he first sees her, he thinks that she's a statue, because her skin is hard as marble, and also Marius, another vampire he meets, his skin is also turning hard. And so he sees that's his future. This is the progression of vampirism. You turn slowly into a statue and you stop moving. And initially he's totally shocked and he's like, oh my God, that can't happen. It can't happen. But then he's like, 5 minutes later, he's like, if I drink Akasha's blood, I will get as powerful as she is. And wants to get her blood, and there is no reason shown why he changes his mind about this. He doesn't reflect on it. It's just, oh well, let's do it differently. I dislike that. I wouldn't have minded so much that he changes his mind, that he completely turns around, does a 180, if there had been a process shown. But there isn't a process. It just happens. And that's why I give only 3 points for main characters. Criterion 2, side characters. There are basically 4 side characters in the vampire Lestat, and first it's Nicholas, Lestat's childhood friend, and they both run away together to Paris. So Lestat is born as son of a nobleman in a castle, and he wants to be an actor, and his friend Nicky wants to be a violinist, and after a while they decide to run away and to be artists in Paris. And Nicky is constructed a bit to be a counterweight to to Lestat, I feel. But Nicky thinks that Lestat's acting is evil, and he kind of thinks that his own violin playing is evil, but not really, and then later he gets turned into a vampire, and he totally can't parse that, and doesn't really, he breaks down in a way, and it's, he never feels touchable, he's never really a tangible character. He's more a thing for Lestat to worry about. The second side character is Gabrielle. She's Lestat's mother, and she is very sick, and close to dying, and to save her, Lestat turns her into a vampire. And here again we have the phenomenon that Anne Rice's prose swells and breaks into bloom, if that's how you express it, starts to flourish and to be alive when a female character enters the stage. And I think Gabrielle has her own book, and there's Pandora. So she seems to have noticed that she prefers to write female characters. But Gabrielle, it's when she's turned, and the first time when she's out with Lestat and when she's finding her bearings, it's very, very interesting, very intensely written, very nice. And she's just like Claudia. She's a very strong character. She goes her own way. She has her own motivations and finds her own style of being a vampire. And Lestat doesn't really like that. He would prefer to travel the world with Mama. But Gabrielle develops a liking to get into the woods and burrow into the earth to spend the days there. And if someone digs her up, she kills them while she's still sleeping. She rips off their heads, which is very nice. But she's a highlight in terms of characters, and I was very sad when she slowly trickled out of the story again. Then we have Armand, who we know from Interview with a Vampire, and if he seemed like a sick bastard there, he really is a sick bastard in The Vampire Lestat. We learn about him from Marius, fourth side character, Marius, who is Armand's creator, his sire. And Armand was very young when he was turned into a vampire, not as young as Claudia, but a teenager. And he has experienced violence. He has experienced loss. He has been through some shit. And that explains a bit why he's not quite right in the head. But he's got this idea that vampires are evil and that God hates vampires, but evil must exist, and that he forbids his coven to enter churches, and it's implied that he believes this stuff himself, yet he enters churches. It's a bit confusing, and the way he creates new members for his coven is he gives them just enough blood to turn them, and then he buries them deep in the earth, and they have to dig themselves out. And yes, as I mentioned in my previous review, that explains a lot about his coven. And he's nasty, and he's so nasty that he doesn't cross the threshold to being great again. Lestat is nasty, but at least in Interview with a Vampire, he has a certain greatness to him, a certain nasty likability. But Armand is he's beyond. He's just no. And I strongly dislike him. Then there's Marius. Marius is very old, ancient, and when Lestat meets him, he instantly orgasms, and then he keeps talking about how, oh, Marius, he's so wonderful, and his white hair, and his red cloak, and he's so beautiful, and his voice is so... And at a point, I was like, okay, I know you are very gay for Marius. It's okay. Just go do what you have to do, but stop talking about it. And yeah, that was annoying. And we learn Marius' history, and because his history is intertwined with Armand's history, we also learn about Armand. But Marius never really feels like his own character. He's very bland and boring, and he feels mostly like just an information dispenser. And he's just, he's this great ancient one, the one everybody knows his name, but is he real? Does he exist? Is he just a legend? And that's really all that's to him. So I give a low score here of 4 points. I would have given 2, I think, if it weren't for Gabrielle, but I really like her, and yeah, so 4 points for side characters. Criterion 3, relationships. It's the same problem as in Interview with a Vampire. Relationships don't really happen. They aren't really real. They are stated. They are alleged. And it's once Lestat is turned into a vampire, he stays away from Nikki, he stays away from his family, because he doesn't want them to see that he has changed, because being a vampire changes you. Get those preternatural eyes and beauty, and he doesn't want them to see it. We never find out how he came to that decision, if it was hard, why he made it, and that sometimes he says that he misses them, but we never really see that. He never goes to lurk close to them or pine over them, and it's no. And then the crassest thing regarding relationships is the switch to Interview with a Vampire, because he meets Marius, and Marius tells him, here, you've been turned into a vampire while you were still too young. You haven't learned loss yet. You haven't learned how it feels to grow old. You haven't matured enough. And if you don't have this basis of human experience, it's very likely that you will become one of those vampires who go into the fire at some point, or who go into the sun and kill themselves. And to avoid this, he gives him the task of going out and living out a human life. So that means finding a family and living together with them. And that's the reason he goes to Louis, to build a family, but he doesn't come across like a family man. He doesn't come across like someone who wants to experience a human life in Interview with a Vampire. And it's tacked on. This explanation is tacked on to find a way to get Lestat to the United States, and because his father moved to the US, and to want to be together with Louis, but not really. And it explains why Lestat never tells Louis about other vampires, because that's something Marius tasks him with too. He says, you don't talk about other vampires, you don't talk about the ancient ones, you don't tell anyone where other vampires sleep, you don't. Because if vampires were to organize, they could subdue humanity and make them into their cattle. I think that was the reason. And Lestat faithfully keeps to that. But in the family and human experience department, no, we don't see that he has a mother whom he loves, that he has a best friend whom he used to love and then doesn't love anymore. And yes, maybe we could explain him not really liking Louis by, well, he stopped liking Nikki when he turned into a vampire, but that same it's not same with Gabrielle. He still loves Gabrielle. He still wants to be together with her. And this is why I give only 3 points for relationships. Criterion 4, conflicts. In the Vampire Lestat, there's a bit more talk about morality. There are some discussions between Lestat and Nikki, and we have Lestat's concept of the Savage Garden versus Nikki's idea of justice, and it's expressed clearly, but there's not much consequence to this discussion. And again, we have the problem that Anne Rice doesn't really know how to write contemplative characters. And then Lestat never has to work for a plan. So when he's first turned into a vampire, he goes to a village and jumps around there, climbs things, tests his vampire strength because he thinks, well, before I go into the city, I should know what I'm able to do. But we don't see that he notices, oh, I can do things. Holy shit, what's going on? Who am I now? What am I now? And also with vampire mode, never reflected. And this goes into world building, but in this situation, when he rides his horse to the city, we'd expect to see the world through his eyes, the new sensations, everything. But it stays superficial. The only moment when it's really Rice gets into details and things get visceral and tangible and real is when Lestat drinks blood, and all the other situations, it's his sensuality is really restricted. Then when he has his confrontation with Armand, it's like Armand and Lestat, they have different conceptions of where a vampire's place is supposed to be. Armand thinks that vampires are disgusting, they should live in filth and in stench and not be part of human society. And Lestat has this Savage Garden idea that he's a predator amongst his prey and he has his place in society, and he states this idea as if he had the goal of being this, and that this goal is older than his confrontation with Armand. But we never see it before. I think it's mentioned before, but we never see him really try to move into this position. We never see him pick up relationships and try to work towards a place within society. He says that's what he wants to be, death in the Savage Garden, but he never does things that would make him that in a really manifest way, not just some dude who occasionally kills people, but, someone with a status in society. He never works towards that. And so because he never really has goals and he never really has to make plans, he never really has to be in conflict with things as they are. Because if you have goals, if you have plans, there are things in the way the world is now that aren't the way you want them to be. So there's conflict, and you have to work through this conflict. You have to define yourself, define your means, define the way you want to change the world to better suit your own ideas. And he never does that. He's never really in conflict. There are conflicts, but they never get real. They are never really played out. Yes, and that's why I give only 3 points for conflict. Criterion 5, world building. Lestat's life lets Louis' life in Interview with a Vampire look very dull and boring and uneventful because Louis does nothing. He's just dragged around by other people, while Lestat, while his plans suddenly fall from the sky, he has plans and he executes them. What I didn't like is that the characters feel a lot like world building. It's the title of the book already says it: The Vampire Lestat. Then there's The Vampire Marius, The Vampire Amant, The Vampire Pandora, and they are like institutions, and they don't feel like characters who have a present and now and current plans, who have a past and have changed to who they are today. And she tries to do it with Lestat, that he starts out as Louis 2.0 and then turns into Lestat the Bastard. But with the Vampire XYZ, these characters, it doesn't happen. Their present and future feels just like a continuation of their past. They've never really changed. And that's characters shouldn't feel like this. Characters should, in my opinion, characters should feel like people and not like part of world building, not like institutions, not like the Library of Alexandria. The character feels like the Library of Alexandria. It's not what I want. Also, there are some contradictions. Like Armand has never heard of other vampires. He thinks his coven is the last on Earth, maybe, but everyone else has heard of Armand, and it's strange. And it feels flat. I don't get a feeling for the time. I don't really get a feeling for the places. And I guess it's because I didn't see the movie. Well, the Queen of the Damned was made into a movie. And I don't know if Vampire Lestat too, but I haven't seen them. So atmosphere-wise, it falls pretty flat. And I guess that's the way Interview with a Vampire would feel without the movie. But 3 points for world building. Criterion 6, choreography. Since we have a first-person narrator, again, there's not much with intertwined storylines and just the story. It felt like jump and run with cutscenes. And cutscene is when Lestat meets a new vampire and gets to know him, learns things about him. The vampire tells his story and stuff, and in between it was just getting from A to B and not much to it. That's not really my kind of story, not really the kind of story I like. But there wasn't anything wrong objectively, so I give a neutral 5 points. Criterion 7, language. I don't have much to say about the language. It wasn't much more flowery than an Interview with a Vampire. It wasn't much less flowery. It mostly flew under the radar. The only thing I noticed was that Marius sounds exactly like Lestat, and that annoyed me, and I didn't like that. It took me out of the story, but it's not a big point, so I'm just giving neutral 5 points for language. Criterion 8, personal touch. Here we have the same phenomenon as in Interview with a Vampire, meaning we have eroticism and sensuality without sexuality, and it's very homoerotic again, this book, and it's explicit. It's stated that Lestat and Nikki sleep in the same bed and they kiss. It's not explicitly described as they don't kiss. They don't explicitly kiss with tongue, but you know. and it feels like Anne Rice wanted to write a gay couple, but she didn't want to write a gay couple. So it remains unstated, but it's definitely there. And I enjoyed this sexuality and eroticism without sex. It was fun. But as in Interview with a Vampire, there comes a point where it was icky because there's this quasi-incestuous moment between Lestat and Gabrielle, because Gabrielle is Lestat's mom, and I don't why. I don't know why. So, in my review of Interview with a Vampire, I put the failure of writing a contemplative, reflective character as personal touch. I don't do this here because much more happens in Vampire Lestat than in Interview with a Vampire. The book is twice as thick. And also there's more to Lestat than just his depression. And Louis is basically just his depression and his moral conflict, which never really happens. And so, and also this failed depth is mostly in the beginning of the book, in the first chapters, and then it becomes more and more irrelevant because the moral topic and all it loses relevance. So I didn't notice it in such a negative way. So yeah, all we have is the quiet unspoken gayness, and I give 7 points for that. Criterion 9, DNF, didn't finish. I finished the book. I wasn't always happy during finishing it. I wasn't always unhappy, so I give 7 points. Criterion 10, fun. As I said, I had some fun with the book, but there are some key scenes that you'd think that Anne Rice was really excited about writing, and I feel like you can tell when she liked a scene, when she was into a character, because when Gabrielle enters the story, there's so much. And when Lestat tells his perspective on the events of Interview with a Vampire, it really comes to life. But there are other scenes, like when he goes full on vampire on stage in Paris. The scene didn't come across. It didn't work for me. And when he's on stage as a rock star in the 90s or 80s, I don't know. But he's on stage as a glam rock vampire, and it doesn't come across. And also when Lestat decides that he wants to try to wake up Akasha, the vampire mother queen, and he thinks that playing Nikki's violin would be a good way to get her moving again. And I feel like it's supposed to be an emotional scene, to be a gripping scene, an exciting scene, but it just didn't come across. And yeah, it was confusing, because why wasn't Anne Rice excited about this scene? Why didn't it feel like she was excited about this? In other scenes, you feel her excitement, but there, no. And it just was frustrating, because some scenes were so good. Others, why weren't they as good? And yeah, that's why I give only 5 points in the fun department. So this leaves us with a final score of 45 points. This is less than Interview with a Vampire, but mostly because some problems of Interview with a Vampire only become problems in the vampire Lestat, because, for example, 1 Louis is annoying, but 2 Louis are even more annoying, and yeah, it becomes more aggravating when you see problems repeated in the second book. And that's how this score comes to be. All in all, I'd still recommend reading this book. It's an okay read, and yeah, if you have any questions or remarks or your own interpretation of things, tell me in the comments. And yeah, Queen of the Damned, I haven't read it. I have read it 20 years ago, but I will read it again. I haven't done so yet. Same goes for Tale of the Body Thief and maybe Servant of the Bones. So it will be a while until you'll see links to these somewhere here. Yeah, but that's it for now. Bye bye.